pertinent no matter what age or time we live in. But yes, all the more pertinent now because we do see certain pockets of so-called explosions of anger in various forms, in terms of terrorism, in terms of people killing each other, in terms of domestic violence and all of that. So that's where this particular topic came to my mind. Let's start with a couple of statements where I'd like us to tell me whether we agree or disagree. Okay, so there are a few statements that I'd like to check for. One is that anger and aggression are natural to us. They are not alien feelings, but anger and aggression are natural human feelings. How many of us agree with this? Okay, natural, okay. So, primary being? Okay, so you're talking of anger stemming from something else, okay. Yes, sir? Asserting as in acknowledging firstly the fact that yes, I am angry, and then giving it a certain mode of expression. Now sometimes assertion happens through a rather violent manner, let's say, not really, because anger is a feeling or an emotion rather, and I may choose to not express it, to not assert it, right? I might feel very angry and at the same time maintain a smile on my face and say, no, everything's all right. So in that case, I'm not asserting. Asserting would mean acknowledging and then giving it a certain form of expression, which could mean vocalizing, it could mean violent action, it could mean maybe self-inflicting some kind of danger. All of that is assertion. So, I'm sorry? That's also a choice, but then that wouldn't constitute assertion, because when we bottle up, there is emotion which we refuse to acknowledge. Right? So that wouldn't constitute assertion. Yeah, that's suppression, and that obviously has a whole lot of impact on health in terms of blood pressure and stress levels, cholesterol levels. Sorry? We may release it, but then you will have to have some form of assertion. You may bottle it up, but then eventually, let's say you choose to write it out on a piece of paper, burn it, then yeah, that is assertion in one form. That's release. But simply bottling it up won't release it on its own. You will have to channelize it in some way. May not be direct, but some channel is necessary. And sometimes release could also be through a channel like, let's say, art. Right? Someone who's angry may go and draw a very beautiful painting and then release it through that. That's also asserting it in a certain way. But asserting would mean that there is some active step. It can't be passive. You can't say, let my anger deal with itself. That wouldn't happen, because it's your anger. You need to deal with it in some way. Right? Okay, so about half of us here are in agreement with the fact that anger is natural. Let me give us another statement. Let's say frustration leads to aggression. How many of us agree here? Frustration leads to aggression. Okay, again, not always, but yeah, as a general perception. Okay, again, half of us seem to agree here. Yet another one. Other people are the cause of our anger. Other people are the cause of our anger. Let's say she said something abusive to me and therefore she is the cause of my anger. Should not. Okay. Alright, so that's an overwhelming majority saying no. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in this moment I may very well want to blame her, but at some point I'm going to say, no, I was in some sense responsible for that action, right? Okay, so there we are differing in our opinions. We'll come back to these statements, but before that, given that we're talking of asserting anger, asserting as in giving active expression to anger in whichever form that we choose to. We'll talk of the forms later. Firstly, I'd like to touch upon how to identify anger in various forms. There are, if you look at psychological theories, there are multiple types of anger. More often than not, we talk of 12 types, 12 categories in which anger can be classified and expressed. One, of course, is, I'll make a quick note of all of them and then we can discuss. So we have behavioral anger, which expresses in terms of behavior. There is passive, there is verbal, constructive, which of course is a good way of a productive, let's say, form of anger. Self-inflicting, which we often see. Chronic, volatile, judgmental, overwhelmed, which is again a very commonly seen form of anger. Retaliatory, paranoid, and deliberate. Right, so 12 forms of anger which are more often than not theoretically discussed. Deliberate anger, constructive. This one? Here, judgmental. Okay. So if you talk of recognizing these kinds of anger, behavioral anger is anger which is expressed in terms of behavior. So let's say I take up something and slam it at someone or on the wall. That's anger expressed through my behavior. Or I shout at somebody. That's anger which is expressed through behavior, and it's very obvious. So it's not suppressed. It's very well expressed anger. May not always be constructive, but it's expressed nevertheless. Passive anger, now that's a slightly more interesting and equally dangerous thing for relationships. Passive anger would mean that I'm angry, but at the same time either I'm afraid to give it an expression, or there is a certain social image that I want to maintain. I want others to think of me as very good. Possible that he or she is reserved, but not always. It may very well be an extrovert who wants to maintain a certain social image. So let's say I'm angry, but I don't want people to think of me as angry because that affects my image, right? I want to be seen as this goody-goody person. So how do I express my anger is I become very sarcastic. I crack a joke at this person in a way that is deprecatory, in a way that's insulting, but then I don't express it as anger, I express it as humor, supposed humor. Or I mock a certain person, the language by itself becomes very sarcastic. Right? I'm taunting people indirectly. That's passive anger. So socially, this person is seen as being very nice and polite, but at the same time, the statements that he or she tends to make are not very good for a relationship, because people often tend to feel hurt about this particular person. If there is a certain pattern of a person being very sarcastic and humorous in a way that's insulting, then you know that there is a sense of anger which you need to tackle. It would be good to confront this person and say, where does this come from? Where is the hurt coming from? Where is the anger coming from? Verbal anger, as the name suggests, is verbal in the sense I shout, I call people names. It's vocally expressed, right? Yeah, labeling and shouting in general, right? I think you're this, I think you're that, you are responsible for my situation and all of that, which is very vocally expressed. There is no physically violent expression, but it's all oral. Constructive anger, now this is something that's often perceived as being good in the sense that it leads to some sense of sublimation, right? So this person is angry, but what he or she chooses to do is not be violent or not shout, but do something about that anger. Now it's called constructive theoretically purely because it leads to a certain sense of action for the person, but remember that the action could go either way. For example, let's say a sense of anger which has led to people being Naxalites, right? We see a whole lot of Naxal issues happening in the country and overseas. That's constructive anger in the sense there is a sense of collective anger which has helped them construct a certain movement. Now in this case the movement is not entirely positive for the society. Yeah, constructive in the sense it leads to construction. Now the judgment on the construction could be either way. Right. Not necessary, and that's where we tend to sometimes, when we give expression to anger, and normally we tell people go ahead express anger, which can be in the long run a dangerous thing, because constructive doesn't always mean pleasant for everyone. Right? From the perspective of, let's say, the Naxals or a terrorist group, it may seem constructive because they're trying to do something to achieve their cause, but at the same time socially it may not always be beneficial. Of course, you may also have constructive anger in a positive sense, where let's say there is a person who's been brought up as a destitute. He or she grows up, there is a certain anger towards the society because he was probably robbed of his parents or money or whatever. But maybe the person chooses to, let's say, construct a home for the orphans or destitute in his adulthood. That's also constructive. But again, it could go both ways, so it's not always a beneficial kind of anger. Self-inflicting, as the name suggests, is where the anger is inflicted back on self. You often see cases where people try and harm themselves physically, sometimes bordering on suicidal. Right? So those are cases which we need to be on the lookout for if you see a pattern here. Often seen even in kids. Now remember, because our social construct is such, kids even at the age of above 10 weeks, when they get into their third month of existence, they are capable of understanding anger. Right? Normally, although babies at that age can't really express it, but they perceive anger. And beyond about 10 to 12 months of age, they are very well capable of expressing it also. Right? But by the time they are about 3 months old, they are very capable of perceiving anger in their environment. So you would see them reacting even if the parents happen to be angry with each other. You will see the kid react either in terms of health problems, or they cry, they ask for more attention than is required, because they are quite perceptive. It is, the expression of it is learned over time. The perception is a function of the collective consciousness. Because it's there in the human consciousness, every human being, regardless of age, understands it. They may not be able to express it. Now, self-inflicting anger is also often seen in kids. Very often you see kids banging, danger them. It's possible in all age groups. It's not necessarily adult behavior. Chronic, the term obviously means that it's something that extends over a period of time. If you see people who seem to be angry at society in general, not just one person or one particular situation, but someone who operates from a space where they say that, everyone's against me, or I never get a good job, I never get a good boss, I'm always in bad relationships. That's chronic anger, which can very well lead to depression. So that's something that calls for attention. If you happen to see someone who's chronically angry, and when I say chronic, anything that extends beyond a few weeks is chronic. So that's something that needs to be treated therapeutically. Right? And when you say chronically anger, these are not people who might appear angry in the violent sense. I mean, they may not be the kind of people who shout or who throw things around. The subtle statements that they make are the ones that tell us that it's chronic anger. They're the kind of a person who says, I'm always very unlucky in life, I always get into the wrong kind of relationships, I never get a good job here, this country has gone to the dogs, right? That kind of a statement. Yeah, it may be due to lack of self-confidence. Very often it is because of esteem issues. So, lack of? Yes. Right. So, all of these are very subtle statements which indicate a certain chronic anger. Right? He or she is always blaming the system, blaming the government, blaming family. Very subtle statements, but if there is a pattern of such statements, it may be time to get some help for the person. Some amount of counseling could certainly be called for here. Volatile anger is something that needs to be handled on a case-to-case basis, in the sense volatile indicates that sometimes the anger is at the peak and the other times the person's absolutely calm and normal. And this is the kind of a person that we normally call short-tempered. There are bursts of anger, but once it's done, then the person acts normally. Yeah, it depends on the situation. Sometimes there is a regular trigger, in the sense the person always, let's say, gets angry only in work situations, not in personal situations, or the other way around. Sometimes there are triggers which can span across various areas, not necessarily only one particular trigger. So that's volatile, and that needs to be dealt with in terms of a specific case-to-case basis. Judgemental anger is, it's called so because it expresses itself in the form of judgments. Like, let's say, a dramatic offensive statements like all Muslims are terrorists, right? Or let's say all rich people are corrupt. That kind of a statement where you're labeling, and the label has no basis to it. But no matter how much you try and talk to the person about the situation, it's difficult to logically convince the person, because there is no rationale to the statement in the first place, but there are labels attached to either communities or to a certain profession or to any particular kind of a group of people, where the anger is expressed in the form of judgment. This one is bad, that one is negative in whatever way. And obviously the judgments are not positive, we're talking of negative judgments here. So here again, the anger is not violent, verbally or physically, but you find this person using a whole lot of labels, negative labels, for a certain target group. So that's judgmental anger. Overwhelmed anger is where the person gets overwhelmed because of the anger, and therefore the expression is overt, in the sense you would see someone picking up a chair and throwing, the kind of things that we've been observing in Parliament, or let's say the regular shoe throwing incidents that we see against politicians. That's overwhelmed anger, where the person doesn't see a way out and therefore resorts to any extreme measure, not regular shouting at people, but extreme measures which call for attention of more people than required. That's overwhelmed. Here the person is not in control of the feeling and therefore may need restraint. If the overwhelmed anger happens to repeat as a pattern, it is obviously bound to become chronic at some stage. It will need some psychological attention there. Retaliatory anger, now this is not something that could be a pattern, it could be a one-off situation for a lot of people. Retaliation in the sense that I believe someone has done something wrong to me and therefore I need revenge, right? So the anger is very focused towards one person or one situation, and all I want to do is get even for that particular situation or that person. So it's not that I'm generally angry with anyone, but there is a very focused degree of anger. Now it depends on how much the level of stored emotion is. If the person happens to have a whole lot of bottled up emotion, any situation that calls for retaliation might be a cause of eruption, which is not really required, but it depends on how emotionally healthy the person is. If it's a small matter of retaliation where the person is in general in good emotional health, then it's all right, it will pass off. Any one expression of getting even, sometimes even in terms of confronting and getting done with the dialogue, that's good enough for retaliation. This doesn't have to be a pattern, it could be a one-off situation that triggers it. Paranoid anger is, again, sometimes borders on psychological issues, including schizophrenia, including paranoia, where anger comes out of fear, like you suggested at the beginning. Anger is not the base emotion here, but there is a whole lot of fear. Like let's say I'm graduating out of college and I'm not very confident about my capabilities. So there's this fear about, will I get a job or will I be unemployed the rest of my life, right? And if that fear builds up over a period of time, and I keep, let's say, hearing news reports of the fact that unemployment is going up and people in this particular field are not getting too much of employment, then that fear builds into an anger which says, oh, the system is not supporting me, the society doesn't support me, and therefore I'm angry because of my fear. Not because I'm angry about the society, but because I think I'm incompetent, but obviously I don't want to acknowledge my incompetence. This can also be seen in a social sense sometimes, especially in countries where you find a lot of dictatorial practices. If you look at the collective emotion is fear, which leads to an uprising, which leads to anger, right? So it can be observed on both a small and a large scale. And finally is deliberate anger, which is interesting. Deliberate anger would mean that I'm not really angry, but I think that I'll have better bargaining power in the situation if I show that I'm angry. So it starts off by just acting out the fact that I'm angry. I'm not really angry, but if I show that I'm angry, you'll probably be in fear of me and get things done for me, right? That's the emotion that happens here. But if it's not controlled well, it could mean that the person adapts it as a pattern, right? Very often we complain of bosses who are angry. More often than not, it starts at a space where this person says, if I enact being angry, everyone will be fearful of me and get my work done on time. But over a period of time, the person doesn't realize that it enters an actual behavior pattern. And then it's difficult to shift out of it. And of course, it's not productive in the sense people around don't really appreciate the person because they don't get why this person is angry in the first place. So those are in general 12 different kinds of anger that are often talked about. Now coming back to those couple of statements that we made, and we gave our opinions at the beginning about anger being a natural emotion, frustration leading to anger and all of that. More often than not, these statements are taken to be true because of a whole lot of psychological literature that's been floating around, and also because a whole lot of theories, established theories in psychology, did support those statements at one point in time. Especially if you look at the works of Sigmund Freud and even the American Psychological Association, which is taken as the sort of a grandmaster of psychology for all practical purposes. There were a whole lot of theories perpetrated by these people early on which said that, okay, anger is acceptable as a natural emotion, let's deal with it. Which is why even when we talk of controlling anger, the courses that you would often see are labeled as anger management courses. They're not, we don't talk of anger elimination, we talk of anger management because the premise is that anger is natural, so no need to eliminate it, let's just deal with it, let's just manage it. However, research that's been happening over a period of time, and also a whole lot of practical work that's been happening around this area has over and over again proven the fact that anger is, it's not a natural emotion, it's a cultivated emotion, socially cultivated emotion. Now of course the roots are so deep that it's difficult to pinpoint where it began, but let's look at where it comes from. Because when we talk of assertion, we will also need to figure out why to assert in a certain way, right? Now, in general, when we talk of expressing anger, we say, okay, let it out, write it out, or maybe speak to a wall, speak to a person, but express it. But then think about it. When we talk of anger being natural to us and giving it a form of expression, what does it lead to? Okay, today I'm angry at somebody and I say that, okay, I'm angry at this person, but for some practical reason I can't talk and resolve it. So let me go home, write out everything on a piece of paper, I'll burn up that piece of paper. Or let me go home and punch a pillow for a little while and I'll be okay, right? I'm giving expression to my anger. But what does it lead to? social problems perhaps, health problems, yeah, definitely, it will definitely raise my BP even if it's for a little while. Spoiling relationships, okay, but am I not venting my anger? No, I'm going punching my pillow, right? I'm not put a lid in the sense, I'm not saying I'm not angry, I'm saying I'm angry and I'm going to punch my pillow. Yes, right, I am venting out, but is that healthy?
No, that's what what I mean is when you punch the pillow, right in Iter, burning everything.
Right.
But where that you have thought about that anger, if that is not eliminated, which you are thinking process.
Okay.
Then the again the same different incidents will be there and again you will get.
Right. Which means what you're talking of is that today I might vent it out by punching a pillow or burning up a letter, but then the next time around, if there is a situation that calls for a similar response, okay, to be angry again, you can come back tomorrow and punch another pillow, right? So what I'm setting in motion is a cycle, right? I'm managing it for today, but then what's the guarantee that I'll not get angry tomorrow, right? So what I'm setting in motion is a cycle of expression. All these? Yes, it's almost an addiction, because what I'm saying is it's all right to be a victim. Right? When you feel angry, ultimately that's the basic feeling, right? You're feeling victimized. Right? And what the message that I'm giving is, it's okay to be a victim over and over again. I choose to be a victim, and instead of dealing with a person or a situation, I'll go punch a pillow, and tomorrow again I'll wake up fresh to be a victim to somebody else. It's a vicious circle. Yes, and which is where all those statements that we talk about, anger being natural, it's all right to vent out, frustration can lead to anger, all of these are myths and not real statements. We accept it as real because it's convenient, it's short-term management, but long-term it doesn't really work. So it helps to think about what is the root cause. One is the fact that we cannot be angry unless we care about a person or a situation. Right? We're not really angry about a beggar on the road. We're indifferent to it, right? The people that we get angry with are the people that we have a certain kind of a relationship with. It's either love or liking or affection in some sense, or at least some sense of caring, if not an extreme emotion of love. Or we get angry about a situation that we care for. Let's say I'm very passionate about my work and somebody does damage to my work. That's when I get angry about it, right? So where does my anger come from here? The anger comes from my caring. The anger doesn't come as a negative emotion. The anger comes because I care, and that the care in some way is disrespected, right? So let's say I'm a painter making a beautiful painting. Somebody comes and throws water at it. I care about my painting, and that's where I'm angry at this person who damages it, right? So it's not so much about the person. It's about the fact that I care for my work. If you are able to reroute the anger to where it comes from, that space of caring or concern, then the anger becomes positive energy. We often talk of positive thinking and anger being used as a positive channel. In order to arrive at that channel, we need to arrive at the space of concern. So if I'm angry at, let's say, corrupt politicians, where is my space of caring? Sorry? Country, to some degree patriotism, or for that matter it could just be the fact that I want a safe, secure place to live in, so I'm caring for myself. It may not be all that patriotic, but that's equally fine. But then if I'm able to identify that and say, okay, I choose to live in a space which is free of corruption, where systems run smoothly, if that is my concern, then there is no point in being angry about politicians. One way to deal with it is I try and choose to kind of deal with the system, let's say go on a fast, get the media in and direct my concern in some way, not direct my anger. Or another way is to say, all right, let me move to another place and fulfill my need for a safe, secure place. Right? It doesn't help to keep complaining about a corrupt system when I'm not willing to do anything about it. And which is where we come to the assertion part, where assertion is active expression, it's not passive expression. So simply sitting out, complaining, maybe writing articles or blogs about how corrupt the system is not active expression, because I'm not choosing to do anything about it. And at the same time, what I'm doing is probably punching that pillow, which is a cycle, right? How many articles do I write? How many blogs do I post? At the end of it, I'm doing the same thing over and over again, which is not helping me, because I'm not operating from the space of concern. I'm operating from the space of anger, which is just an expression of the concern. So there is no point in curing the symptom. Right? It's about getting down to the disease, curing the disease, and then figuring out what next. So it is really a myth that venting is good or venting is healthy, because all we are setting is a cyclical motion which will come back over and over again. For some of us, it doesn't come back very soon, so we think the situation is dealt with, but there again, you never know when the next trigger can arise. So ultimately, it's a matter of choice. So what I'd invite us to do is, the next time around when we are angry, stop at a certain point and think about, where is the space of concern? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. It's not about why are we angry, but it's about where is the space of concern, and that simple statement directs us back to where we need to be. Of course, in a longer run, it helps to identify those 12 types that we've spoken about as to what kind of anger do we tend to express, because it helps to identify the concern in a better way. But the simple question to ask is, what am I concerned about? What do I care about in this situation? That triggers the anger. So if I'm clear about that space of concern, then I could make active efforts to deal with that space rather than divesting my energy into anger, which doesn't really help me. It may sound, and trust me, because we are so used to it as a social group, to vent anger, to, we're taught to express and all of that, get it out of our system, which we are normally told about. It's healthy in the short run, but we need to go beyond that now. I think we as a human collective are at a space where we are capable of dealing with that. We don't really need short-term measures anymore, because I guess all of us are seeing the results of the short-term measures. We're seeing it in our political system, we're seeing it in our social system. It's time we get to that next level where we say, let me not do short-term management, let's look at the one beyond that. So it's one simple question at the end of the day. What do I care for? And that starts the process of really healing and not really curing the symptom. Because the symptom may vanish today, but it's bound to return. So that's where the point of assertion is not the regular assertion that we talk about, but something totally different. That's something I'd invite us to think about, explore. The next time you're angry, ask yourself that question. That definitely helps. Sounds simplistic, but that's ground reality. Do we have questions, or do we want to take up any discussions?